morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today, as always, and I am so excited to be back with Jessica Burbank this week. Jessica, it's so good to see you. We missed you last week.
It is very good to be back in action here on Rising with you, Amber.
Awesome. Deadline is the word of the day today. Congress is rushing to pass a funding bill to keep the government open. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is meeting with Israel leaders to sway them toward a ceasefire so aid can enter Gaza before famine blankets the entire area. And GOP presidential frontrunner Donald Trump must come up with $464 million before Monday to post bond in the New York civil case against him. He sent out a fundraising memo begging supporters to help with his ballooning legal bills, writing, "Keep your filthy hands off Trump Tower." That's where we will begin today.
The New York Post is reporting that New York Attorney General Letitia James has initiated steps to seize assets from President Donald Trump following his stated inability to post bond in his $464 million civil fraud ruling. The New York Post is reporting these filings in Westchester County show the state's readiness to take Trump's golf course and private estate. So the question is, will this impact Trump and his campaign? Amber, what do you think?
It's no question. I mean, that's a lot of money. It's a huge chunk of change. And I think what's interesting is that Trump's lawyers were saying that he had no ability to pay this bond, that they basically went to 30 different underwriters who all declined to get involved in the case. But then Trump said on Truth Social that he does have the cash, saying through hard work, talent, and luck, I currently have almost $500 million in cash, a substantial amount of which I intended to use in my campaign for president. But then he pointed out that he owes, $450 million in this bond, in this case to post bond. And it's kind of crazy that this is even a thing, that to appeal your case, you have to post the full judgment plus interest in bond, especially with a judgment of this magnitude. It seems almost intentional. Well, I wouldn't actually say almost. It seems intentional to try to prevent people, not just Trump, but all defendants, of being able to take their cases to appeal.
It's my understanding the Trump legal team already attempted to appeal and it was shot down. Wasn't there already an appeal attempt?
This is for the New York civil fraud case with Judge Engeron, and they're trying to appeal, but basically the rule is that in order to appeal, you have to post bond. Otherwise, the Attorney General, Letitia James, can then start collection on the payment during the appeals process, which she's already signaled now that she's going to try to seize his properties in order to make him pay for the judgment while he appeals the case.
Right. I guess the what was shot down must have been his legal team's attempt at a stay, that he wouldn't have to pay any part of this. Yes. And they said there was no grounds for that. Okay. So in the O.J. Simpson case, this is probably the most famous one that people know about. His Heisman Trophy, I believe it was seized when he had to pay a $33.5 million judgment for a wrongful death suit. So this wouldn't be the first time that someone very prominent with a lot of money would have part of their assets seized. I think a lot of people are surprised that this figure is $464 million. That's not because they're combining judgments and other rulings to sum up his total accounts due, the $83 million ruling for the Jean Carroll case. Now, what's going on here is a lot of this is interest, which is fascinating to me, this prejudgment interest policy, where initially we heard reports it's a $355 million judgment, $354 million judgment. Now that figure's 464, and that's because there's interest that can be added on to the ultimate settlement for the amount of dollars that money would have accrued from the time it was initially owed to the party that's been wronged in a case. And now this $464 million settlement, it's acquiring $87 million in interest every single day that it's unpaid. So this sum of money is only going to keep accumulating. Of course, he posted bond in the Georgia case, about 10% of what was owed. But in this case, it seems like he's really reluctant to post any part of this bond. And that could really hurt him in the long run. If he has the cash, as he says he does, I think it would make sense to pay it before he loses those assets.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, otherwise, Letitia James is going to come swoop in and take his properties, apparently. And I wonder what the process is for if he wins on an appeal and ends up getting this fraud judgment struck down by a higher court. or by a different judge, then does Letitia James return the property? What if she does something to it in the meantime that causes it to lose value? It's just, I'm not really sure what exactly happens if he ends up winning and then New York has to return the money. I don't know how exactly that process works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this sum of money, the fact that the only other example we have is OJ owing $33 million. I'm sure there are other examples, but perhaps they weren't as famous or in the news as much. Yeah, this is a tricky case. I think that a big part of it being this negotiation as to whether or not they could seize assets outside of the state of New York is very interesting. Trump's legal team's very busy with the other cases going on. They're busy with trying to have him win re-election. It's an absolute mess, but you see a lot of Trump's base politicizing this, saying that it's politicized by someone else already, that the reason that they're going after Trump is simply because he's running for office, he's a threat to Joe Biden. And so will it affect his election? I think him having to spend time and energy on this and many, many dollars will, of course, affect him personally. Will he lose votes that he already has, support that he already has? I think he has enough of a loyal base, especially within the Republican Party, that it's not going to threaten him too much.
I think that's right. And I think that actually it probably helps him. We first saw him really spike in the polls in the Republican primary after Mar-a-Lago was raided in the classified documents probe by Jack Smith. And he's continued to climb, of course. He trounced his potential competition in the GOP primary, is now the nominee, and is doing quite well in swing state polls. And I think the longer that these things go on, the more they're dragged out, the more money he's supposed to pay. I think the more people are coming around to the fact that this is politicized. The idea that he would be punished to the tune of $450 million that he has to post before he's even allowed to appeal his case, otherwise risk having his property seized, for things that all real estate developers do is quite stunning. I mean, we heard Kevin Leary, he's one of the sharks on Shark Tank and obviously a mega investor, talking about this repeatedly, that he thinks it's a very unfair case, very unjust, and that it's going to have huge knock-on effects for people doing business in New York. He thinks a lot of people will probably leave the state and no longer invest in New York or do business in New York because they could be fearful of the same thing happening to them. And then you've got this case down in Fulton County in the alleged election interference or attempts to overturn an election. They've already dropped 6 charges from that case, and now it looks like the Trump team is going to appeal the Judge Scott McAfee's decision to allow Fani Willis to remain on the case despite this conflict of interest that she had with her lover, Nathan Wade.
I think as a New Yorker, people in New York are there for the culture. They're there for the small businesses in a lot of cases. And if someone has $370 million to get in ill-gotten gains through inflating their assets, that's a corporation or an individual that's so wealthy that them moving out would actually free up a lot of space for small businesses in New York. Donald Trump getting these loans from the bank by saying, yes, I have the assets to back them up, meant that capital was going to his huge company when it could have been going to small business loans, making people who are trying to earn a living that way in New York much better off. So this framing of it's a victimless crime, I think is not particularly true, because I'm sure there were small businesses that were denied loans that could have gotten them if the bank had that capital going to someone else other than Donald Trump. $370 million in ill-gotten gains is just an obscene amount of money. And when we look at the tax valuation of his property, typical differences between the tax valuation and fair market value, you have the tax valuation at 80 to 90% of fair market value, so almost all of it, just adding 20 or 10%. Trump's was valued at just 2.5% of what fair market value would be on his taxes. So a huge differential there. That's not typical of what we see people reporting in, financial institutions when they're applying for loans, of what the difference between the tax valuation and fair market value is. And I think that's really why Trump is under fire, because 39 times what it was really worth is a big inflation of assets.
I know that Trump is also about to sell his social media account or social media platform, Truth Social, for supposedly billions of dollars, which could free him up to be able to post these bonds. So I just wanted to mention that. My understanding with the tax value and the market value is that the tax value that his properties were appraised at was done by someone who was an independent tax assessor. I don't think that that was Trump himself saying that that was what his properties were worth. That was something that was done independently. And so that's why I think it was dishonest for Judge Engeron to then put a market value on the value that was claimed on the taxes, because those are just two fundamentally different numbers. I hear what you're saying, that his was significantly lower than an average you might see in this case, but I don't think it's significantly lower than when we look at other real estate developers of this magnitude. I'd also, raise issue with the idea that these big firms, these big investment firms that were giving loans to Trump would have used that capital to invest in small businesses. That's fundamentally not their business model. And frankly, businesses don't have to have necessarily liquid capital on hand in order to give out these loans. So I don't think it's right that they wouldn't be able to give loans to other people just because Trump had this loan. And then not to mention the fact that the loan companies, the investors, also have their own independent assessors on staff who go through the value of somebody else's properties. They don't just take Trump's word for it of what he put on these documents. They came to the conclusion on their own that this was a good business deal for them, and they believe that Trump was going to be able to pay them back because of whatever value he had in his real estate assets. So it's not like the company, took the application for a loan and were like, oh yeah, he says that the Trump Tower condo is 30,000 square feet and that Mar-a-Lago down in Florida is worth $400-500 million. We're going to sign off on the loan based on the numbers that he put in the document. They would do their own due diligence before they decided to participate in a deal with him.
I think it's very possible that a big reason these loans were given to Donald Trump is because he would be on the hook legally if he were inflating his assets. And so that's a level of protection that when you're dealing with a major business, you have as a bank, where if they were lying about the value of their property, you can then have legal recourse if you prove that they lied about it. So that's a protection for the bank. There, of course, is a limited amount of loans that banks are able to give out. They've got to make sure that they're in balance and they don't have more risks than they do assets. So I do think, if we didn't have all this money loaned out to Donald Trump, it's very possible, not all of it, but a large sum of it could have been freed up for small businesses. To say that the tax assessor as well is responsible for the inflation of assets is interesting. It sounds to me just like usual corruption of wealthy people not wanting to pay their fair share in taxes. They can afford expensive lawyers and fight the legal case against them if there is one. The IRS is someone who goes after typically not the wealthiest people because they find it to be very expensive. When regular working people are tax burdened by sales taxes, property taxes, income taxes, it just feels out of touch for Donald Trump to be saying like, no, I had this really expensive lawyer value the property for much less than, I said it was worth when it was getting loans, or my team said it was worth when I was getting loans. It does feel out of touch from the working class. And I think that's really where Trump is potentially going to be hurt from this. He's already lost a lot of that base because he didn't deliver on a lot of his promises about draining the swamp and being good on working people. He appointed folks that were not pro-labor to labor mediation boards, and workers saw a lot of decisions not going their way under the Trump administration. So I really think that's where he's losing out. This whole case just makes him seem like a rich guy who's a little bit out of touch.
I will give you this. I 100% agree that the tax system as it is right now has way too many loopholes and is beyond confusing for working class people. I'm more in favor of a flat tax so that everyone pays a percent and that's it. There's no deductions, no crazy loopholes and expensive lawyers you have to hire if you want to reduce your tax burden. It should just be simple to understand. I think Rand Paul put it, you should be able to have the entire U.S. tax code written on an index card. We're going to have to leave it there, but we'll be back with more Rising after this.